All right, so today's topic is whether or not you should go to law school. And the answer for the vast majority of folks out there is a resounding no. Without further ado, I am just going to jump right into this. This is not a legal discussion, it's a discussion of the profession and of career. So it's for a general audience, particularly for anybody who is thinking about applying to law school or who has applied and is now faced with the very real decision as to whether or not they should go to law school and embark down the path of possibly becoming a lawyer. So I'm just going to spit on this, okay? Here we go. Number one, law school has become prohibitively expensive. In fact, it's not just law school, it's tuition in America in general, right? Whether it's college, med school, law school, etc., the cost of higher education in America is astronomical. It is absolutely out of control. There's a million reasons for this. I won't get into it. Suffice to say, the sort of widespread availability of free money at the time you go to school, that's a problem because that's contributed to driving up tuition costs and sticker prices. Another thing that's contributed is this notion that college, university, law school, etc., that these are supposed to be sort of like immaculate, super comfortable establishments, right? With luxury apartments and high-end coffee bars and everything else. It's absolutely preposterous if you see what they're building on college campuses these days. But so the price of law school is absolutely astronomical, and that should be a very significant consideration. Look, I know it's going to offend a lot of people, but the cold, hard reality is that you should not take on a substantial amount of debt to attend a law school that is not particularly prominent, highly regarded, well-known, etc. You need to be real with yourself, okay? And again, it's going to offend some people out there, but these are facts, and the world and the reality of the world and life and career and business, the reality is the reality, and it doesn't care about your feelings. I'm giving this advice to try to help people make the right decision, the decision that's best for them and their families and their future happiness and well-being. So that motivation and that purpose takes precedence over hurting certain people's feelings. The reality is that taking on $150,000, $200,000 in student loan debt to attend a private law school that is not particularly prominent is an absolutely terrible idea. It is a terrible career decision, and it is a terrible fiscal move. Why? Well, let's look at it like this, right? If you go to a highly regarded law school, a law school that has a national reputation or a regional reputation or is well regarded in your state, sure, then that may make sense. But if you're going to a law school that is basically a lower ranked cash grab, where anybody with a pulse can get in and anybody who's willing to pay for it can get a law degree from that establishment, it is not a good move for you to take on substantial debt to do so. If you can go to such a school for free, then maybe you consider it, right? Or if it's a geographic situation where you work full-time, you can go part-time in the evenings, and that's the only school nearby, sure, all of those things make sense. So there are obviously exceptional circumstances, there are caveats, there are specific situations wherein it might make more sense. But as a general rule, don't pay a lot of money to go to a law school that is not particularly well regarded. In terms of school selection, you are often better off going with a prominent state school. If you want to stay in a certain state, if you know there's a state where you live and you want to remain there and you know do your career and everything without leaving, you don't want to try and go across the country, right? If you can get into a good state law school, that's often a fantastic play. There are tons of states in the country that have outstanding state law schools, right? Like, I mean, Florida, you know, you have University of Florida, you have Florida State, Georgia, the University of Georgia, UNC is a top flight school. The University of South Carolina, the University of Virginia, outstanding school. The University of Texas, outstanding school. But even if you get outside of like, you know, obviously the UVA, UNC, UTexas, sort of very elite schools, right? If you get into, the University of Illinois, outstanding school, another highly regarded school, right? So if you can go to, you know, sort of the state flagship university in any jurisdiction, right? If you're in South Carolina, University of South Carolina, right? If you can go to the sort of flagship state university in your state where you want to stay and practice, that's often a very good move, particularly if you can get in-state tuition, and if in-state tuition is relatively affordable, then that makes fiscal sense. And I think, you know, from my perspective, going to a flagship state school in whatever state you want to practice is often a far better decision financially and career-wise than shelling out huge money to go to a mediocre private school in that same state or jurisdiction. Because a lot of those state flagship schools, they have massive networks of alumni who are very loyal. That can open up all sorts of opportunities, and also it's just a better financial decision. So you've got the financial component of it, which is massive. But in terms of the cost of attending law school, you have to remember it's not just the cost in terms of finances. It's not just the cost in terms of dollars out of your pocket and taking on student loans. And, you know, before I sort of move past the fiscal piece of it, folks, you have to understand, okay, the student loan issue is a very real issue. I'm not here advocating for student loan forgiveness, right? Sort of wholesale forgive everybody's loans. I'm not advocating for that. I'm just telling you that law school debt or college debt, this is a very real issue in society that affects lots of people. I know people who are $150,000, $200,000 in debt from college or from law school. I know people who are not able to buy a house, have kids, start a family, right? They're not able to do these, big things in life and move to the next phase of their lives because they are trapped under the weight of mountains of student loan debt. So that's a very real issue, and it's a very significant consideration. It is not something to be taken lightly. The notion of, you'll just take out $200,000 to finance law school and you'll make it back on the back end through some good corporate job. That is not an advisable strategy, and that is not an advisable theory in terms of how the future is going to map out, because the market is changing so dramatically and so rapidly. But it's not just finances, okay? It's also the amount of time that you're going to invest in law school. I know plenty of folks who went out, after college, they got a job, they worked in a certain field, then they decided, okay, I'm going to go to law school. They spend 3 years in law school, and now they're sort of back at the bottom of the totem pole, working their way up, from the ground in law. And they look back and they say, you know what? I should have never left engineering, or I should have never left, finance or business or whatever it is. So you have to think about the amount of time you're going to invest in law school. You're going to pay the price financially, and you're also going to invest those years, and all of that is a cost. Okay, so there's the sort of the cost and the investment piece of it. The second piece of it that I'll get into is talk about the legal market. Okay, let's talk about the market, folks. Just because your dad or your grandfather or your uncle or your next door neighbor or a family friend was a lawyer starting in the 1960s or 70s, and he or she had a great career in law, and they made tons of money and took a lot of vacations and played a lot of golf, and they're a partner and they became very happy, etc., etc. Just because you know somebody or have heard of somebody who had that type of experience in law does not mean that you are going to have the same experience today. If you ever saw Lord of the Rings, the first movie, right? The first line, what's the first line of the movie, people? The world has changed, period. And that's what law is like these days, okay? Gone are the days of sort of Joe Schmo, anybody can just get a law degree, hang a shingle, go get a job at a good firm, have a nice, happy career, right? Law used to be a profession where there was plenty of business to go around for everybody, right? There were a certain amount of lawyers. There's generally plenty of business to go around. There are parts of the country where, you know, if you get a law degree, you hang a shingle or whatever, you were going to get clients, right? It was a different world than it is today. And one of the big changes in today's economy, in today's market, is the rise of technology and the information age and Google, right? Quite frankly, because think about it like this, right? 25 years ago, let's say 25 years ago, right? Even more recently than that, but let's say 25 years ago. 25 years ago, it was much more difficult for people, for consumers, the public, to obtain information about different lawyers, right? To find lawyers who could help them with their problems. It was much more of a sort of word of mouth thing, right? Obviously, yeah, you'd have the phone book and you'd have some advertising, but you know, by and large, 25 years ago, there was far more of a sort of word of mouth, sort of referral driven market reality. And yeah, there's still a lot of that goes on today. But today, increasingly, people who need to find a lawyer for a particular problem, especially if it's complex, if it's specialized, you know, they're going to do some research. They're going to do their due diligence. They're going to go on Google. They're going to do some searches. They're going to go on LinkedIn. They're going to read some reviews, some blog posts. You know, they're going to try to ferret out some information. And, you know, does this lawyer know what he or she is doing? Can this lawyer solve my problem? So, yeah, there's still referrals and there's still word of mouth. And that's a very powerful, stream for obtaining business. But so much business these days is done, or rather is obtained or generated via people going online and searching for their own lawyer, rather than sort of just saying, hey, Joe, do you know a lawyer who does, probate, or do you know a lawyer who does divorce cases, right? People are doing their own homework and doing their own research. Not only that, people have far more access, consumers, the public have far more access to information about the legal process, right? And I think that's a good thing. I think that's fantastic for society. It's causing a lot of growing pains because law, historically, was left to the lawyers, right? And so lawyers and judges and courts and, all these folks in the system, they were able to operate in this system and keep the system kind of a black box, right? The system was very opaque. The public didn't know what was going on. The public didn't understand the inner workings of it. You couldn't just go online and sort of pull the docket and read the decisions and figure it out, right? And so, this is a source of a lot of bad lawyer jokes, and a lot of sort of, disparaging things people say about lawyers at large have a basis in reality. They have a basis in truth, because for many, many years, yeah, of course there were good lawyers, but there were always good lawyers out there, but there were always a lot of bad lawyers out there as well. And there were a lot of lawyers out there who were bullshit artists, right? And these are just facts, and I don't care who it offends, right? I'm not selling anything here. I'm just putting some information out there to help people figure out whether or not they want to go to law school and they want to try to do a career in law. And so it's incumbent upon me in doing so to, try and give you the real version of what's out there. But for many years, for decades, right, a lot of lawyers were BS artists. They were con men, right? They would sell you bogus bill of goods. They'd tell you, we're going to solve your problem. We're going to win this case. Here's our strategy. Here's what we're going to do. Oh, this is what's going on in court, right? Unsophisticated clients, or clients who are not big companies, clients who do not have a lot of money. These types of clients, they didn't really have the means, the technology, the ability, the resources to kind of follow along and see what their lawyer's doing and see sort of what's going on in court and read about the law, right? It's to give you a good example, okay? In today's world, given Google Scholar, right? I think Google Scholar is a phenomenal resource. It is so incredibly important for society because it allows people to go online, to punch in a couple keywords and to read some cases, right? And, if it's 1980 and you're in litigation and your lawyer says, all right, here's the strategy we're going to use, right? This is a great strategy and we're going to do this and it's guaranteed X, Y, Z, right? At the time, you would, for the most part, just have to trust your lawyer's word on that, right? You would not be able to have any real input. You say, hey, that's the strategy he says. I guess it sounds great, right? But today, you can actually, the client, the consumer, the public, right, can actually play a far more interactive role, right? They can be more informed, right? They can look up cases. They can read some case law. They can read some decisions. They can ask some questions, right? Another thing I've seen, and again, this is going to offend some people, but I've been in many cases, right? And I was in one case in particular where the lawyer on the other side, every issue that came up, this lawyer would always tell us, I have I've done a ton of these cases, and I basically wrote the book on that, and this issue I've litigated that issue a million times, and I've won all kinds of cases, and I know what I'm doing, right? That issue, I've addressed that too. I have tons of cases that handle that issue, so I know what I'm talking about. You better just take my word and cave and give my client whatever they want, because I've done so many of this case and that case and this case, and I've dealt with all these issues, right? And so out of curiosity, I went on Westlaw. And so Westlaw, for some people are familiar with the industry, it's Westlaw is it's a legal database, right? It's in my opinion, it's the best legal search database where you can get case decisions and briefs and filings, etc. So I went on Westlaw and I pulled this lawyer's sort of file, if you will, of all the cases that were on Westlaw that were available in terms of cases that he had litigated over his career. And I did not see the robust track record on these issues that the lawyer had suggested he had. And beyond that, I saw that he had actually lost most of these issues, right? So issue X, where he was saying, I've litigated it a million times, I know what I'm doing here, but well, apparently he didn't, because when he had litigated that issue, he had lost and gotten his hat handed to him. But so 20, 30 years ago, that lawyer might be out there sort of, telling people about his reputation and all the cases he's done, and he's got a sort of reputation as being a prominent lawyer in the particular market. When come to find out, he doesn't really know what he's doing. He doesn't really have the track record that he's claiming to have. He doesn't really have the experience that he's claimed to have. I saw far more of that looking back, to the 70s, to the 80s, to the 90s, right, early 2000s, than I do today, right? Because today it is much easier for anybody with an internet connection to do some due diligence and get informed about whether or not their lawyer really does have the experience, the background, the skill set that they're looking for, and that can help them solve their problems. So, given all of this, this goes in the direction of law has gotten increasingly competitive. And the internet and Google is a big part of that, because gone are the days when, it was just, my friend referred me to XYZ lawyer in town, or go call Bill or whoever, right? Those days are over, folks. Now it's go on Google, do some research, get a ton of different options at your disposal, at your fingertips. So that's made law far more competitive. There's also market pressure on big firms, right? You have a lot of big firms that were established, decades ago, if not more than 100 years ago. And for many, many years, for decades, they were used to having just a sort of steady stream of big corporate work, right? Steady stream of sophisticated, financially well-capitalized clients, right? And it was almost without question, right? A lot of these big corporate firms, they would just churn, bill tons of hours, bill tons of time, send their clients these massive invoices, and in some instances not be really getting anything done, right? Just doing work for the sake of doing work and billing hours. And corporate clients and well-capitalized clients have gotten increasingly sophisticated about what they're willing to pay and what they're willing to tolerate with respect to big law and big law's business practices. So that's another piece of sort of downward market pressure. Now you're seeing a whole bunch of firms that were sort of mid-size or regional either disband or be absorbed into mega firms, right? So you have mega firms on one end, a sort of disappearance of a lot of mid-sized and regional firms, and then a whole bunch of people spinning off into small shops of, 10 lawyers, maybe 15 lawyers at the most, and sort of being, lean and very agile and often having particular substantive areas of law in which they specialize or in which they practice extensively. So there's a whole bunch of fluctuations and upheaval going on in the market. The market is not stable like it used to be, and it has become increasingly competitive. What's happening is the world of law is becoming an arena, at least in the private practice sector, right? I'm not talking about public defender or AUSA or government work or nonprofit work. I'm talking about private practice, right? The private practice of law is increasingly becoming a world of haves and have-nots. On one hand, you have folks who are at the top of the profession, and a lot of these people are they're either specialists, right, where they have an outright specialty, whether their specialty is bankruptcy or antitrust or patent litigation or divorce or white-collar criminal law, right? They have a particular niche where they have become the lawyer to call for that particular problem in a certain jurisdiction, or even nationwide in some instances. There are some lawyers, in particular areas of like bankruptcy. There are some bankruptcy lawyers who are the person you call for certain bankruptcy problems, no matter where you are in the country. So you have people who are very specialized. Those people get tons of business. Or you have people who are sort of, high stakes trial lawyers or high stakes commercial litigation people. And those people have, the ones who have, experience and a track record, and they've delivered some big results, right? Those are the people, the specialists and the sort of high stakes litigators. Those are the people who are always in demand. It's the very top of the profession. Same thing on the transactional side, right? You have people at the top of the transactional totem pole who are at the very top of the profession, and they're always in high demand for big deals. So you have those people on one end of the spectrum, and then, you have sort of very few people who are in a comfortable mid-tier position, right? Just to sort of throw it out there, right? You have very few lawyers, relatively speaking, as a percentage of the market, and this is from my perspective. You have very few lawyers, who are, working 40 hours a week, making $125,000, $130,000, $150,000 a year, nice and comfortable, not, killing themselves, not working 70 hours a week, not, overly stressed out or stretched too thin, doing work they enjoy, having a good time, right? You have very little of that, okay? You have a whole lot more lawyers at the sort of lower part of the middle or at the bottom, right? If you look at job postings for lawyers in any major metropolitan area, it should be, if you're considering going to law school and especially taking on a ton of debt and finance your law school education, it should be disconcerting to you. It should be distressing to you, and it should serve as a red flag and a warning sign. I have seen so many job advertisements for early career lawyers, either in their first, to sort of third year out of law school, where the salary is $40,000, $50,000, $60,000, right? And the expectation is, 50, 60 hours a week. And I'm not talking, this is not something that is rare. It's not something where, you can tell me, oh, it's just a terrible firm, who would do that. No, that's what the market looks like. Okay. The market is ugly. I mean, if you look at it, right, the, just as like a comparable, right? Let's take teaching, right? Because before I went to law school at Georgetown, I was a high school teacher in Baltimore City, in inner city Baltimore. And if you look at the teacher salary scale, right, Baltimore was not a particularly high-paying city when it comes to teachers. But if you look at New York City, or you look at Chicago, right, or certain other parts of the country, you're not. If you go to a school that is not either a sort of very good flagship state school or just generally prominent school that's well regarded, right? If you go to a mediocre school or a school that's not particularly well regarded, you are going to be, you get out, and especially if you're not at the top of your class, you don't have some kind of either pre-existing connections or crazy accolades for something. If you graduate from a school that's not particularly well regarded and you don't do very well there, you're going to get out and you are going to find yourself looking at a market where the jobs are not paying very much more than early career teachers make. I've seen plenty of lawyer jobs posted for $40,000, $45,000. And that's the reality. You're going into this now with, especially if you took on debt to finance your education, you're going into this now with more than $100,000, sometimes $150,000 in student loan debt from law school, not to mention possible debt from undergrad, and you're making the same thing that a middle school teacher would make right out of school. Okay, so you have to consider that's the state of the market that you're going to be stepping into. Let's go to the next element of it, which is just kind of the system is broken, right? And I've obviously spoken widely on these issues, written a lot about these issues, and it makes me very unpopular because it offends the sort of conventional idea of this sort of folksy, collegial, everybody's friends. Oh, law is wonderful. We all just get along, and we're on the other side of these cases, but we can all still be friends and ha 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 and slap each other on the back, right? I'm sorry, folks, but law is riddled with corruption, cronyism, greed, bias, incompetence, lack of ethics, and even in some instances, judicial activism, right? So there are a ton of problems in the legal system. There's naked, outright bribery. I mean, read the news, right? You hear about it. There's judges who have been paid off. There's judges who are basically caught giving kickbacks to people who help them get elected, right? In the form of sending them certain business or ordering people to mediate in front of them. So there are big issues in terms of sort of corruption. There's a ton of sort of bias and cronyism, right? I personally have issues with too much coziness between the bench and the bar, right? There's a joke about lawyers. There's a sort of old saying in law that a good lawyer knows the law and a great lawyer knows the judge. Well, why do you think that's a saying that's been around for decades? Why do you think people say that sort of thing? Well, there's a basis there in reality. There's a basis there in truth. There are many instances in which I perceive the bar to be too close for comfort with the bench. I don't like that sort of thing, right? I know it might sound strange to some folks, but I never want a judge to rule in my favor because I know that judge, right? Or that judge knows me personally, right? I never want that. I want a judge to rule in my favor because I am right. I want a judge to rule in my favor because I have the better argument, because the law is on my side, because I have put together a stronger case, because I'm a better advocate. That is why I want the judge to rule in my favor, not because I have a personal relationship with the judge. And I have seen far too many instances in courts throughout America where, I review a case or I look at a case or I read the news, I read an article, I pay attention to what's going on. And I've seen far too many instances where, it does raise, in my opinion, it raises the specter that some parties, some litigants are getting a bit of a leg up, a bit of a +1 because their lawyers are friendly with the judge. I don't like that sort of thing, and I see it all the time throughout America, as I've said, and I think it's become pretty rampant. And I think we should all be suspect of that, and that should make all of us uncomfortable. Just accepting that as kind of, that's how the system is, that's how the game is played. No, that's not how it should be played, right? The system should be such that any person can walk into any courtroom anywhere in America and get a fair process and get thoughtful, impartial treatment and get access to justice and get their day in court and have a judge who will preside over the case and will give them fair treatment and due consideration. Right? That's how the system should be. Not this, sort of we all know each other, let's just all play the game and collect our money, right? I don't like that. I've also seen, in my opinion, a tremendous lack of ethics. I get, because of sort of the number of people who I'm connected to on LinkedIn in particular, or the number of people who know me, I am always getting messages and phone calls and reports from people about other lawyers doing things that are just shocking and beyond the pale, right? I'm always hearing about lawyers who are giving advice that is totally incompetent, or advice or recommending and in fact adopting strategies that appear intended primarily to benefit the lawyer. I'm always hearing crazy stories about insane amounts of money being billed for work that I consider to be atrocious and ineffective, right? I've been an expert witness in a massive legal malpractice case, right? So I have seen so many examples of a lack of ethics, a lack of competence, just not sort of really upholding what it means to be a counselor and an advisor and an advocate. And don't get me wrong, okay? There are plenty of people out there. There are plenty of clients out there. There are plenty of consumers out there who are absolutely ridiculous. Okay, let me just make that clear. There are plenty of folks out there who have absurd expectations, right? One of the reasons why sort of lawyers, some lawyers may seem so jaded and may sort of handle things in a certain way, where they're gonna leave, they're gonna get every penny, and they're gonna lock everything down and paper everything up. One of the reasons for this is that there are so many clients out there and so many people out there in the consuming public who are just absurd, right? They want to pay, they want to pay the lowest rate possible, and they want to get the highest level of service and expertise and the best results, right? They want a Rolls Royce on a Kia budget, but the Telluride is nice, man. I'm telling you, I love that Kia Telluride. It looks like a Range Rover, for God's sakes. But you know what I'm saying, right? These clients they want a Rolls Royce on a Kia budget, okay? And it doesn't work that way, right? I've seen it before. I've seen people, I've seen it and I've heard it, from my friends in the profession, right? Where, somebody shows up and is like, yeah, I want to pay $5,000 or $10,000 and litigate this case, to the sort of bitter end, take them to the mattresses, right? Please, right? But that's what you see, and then you see people who bring you a case and you tell them the pluses and the minuses and the risk and the reward, right? And you don't win, and they flip out at you for not winning and say, well, what do you mean we didn't win? I thought we were going to win this. Well, it's never guaranteed. And then you get everybody who's got the sort of greatest case in the world, right? You turn them away, and they're livid because this is the best case ever. It's a home run. It'll make a name for you, right? Make a name for you. I've heard that one a million times. So many people, because, look at the sheer volume of contacts and inquiries and emails and phone calls, right? Invariably, every couple months, there's somebody who shows up and with a case where their big selling point is it's going to make a name for me, right? It's going to make a name for me. So no wonder there's a lot of lawyers who are jaded. But it's on both sides, right? You have lawyers who have a sort of lack of ethics, lack of decency, lack of competence, lack of sort of basic common sense in terms of how to treat people who are human beings, their fellow man. You have people who will basically take any case. You have lawyers who will take any case that will make them money. They don't care whether it's right or wrong. As long as the client can pay, as long as it's going to put money in their pocket, they don't care. They're willing to sell out for the dollar, right? You see a lot of that. So all of these things are very real considerations about what's going on in the world of law right now. Then we get into sort of access to justice issues, right? The average person in America, a middle-class person in America, certainly a poor person or a working-class person or a middle-class person, even an upper-middle-class person in America, cannot afford access to justice. Take for instance, I will dip for a second into sort of my area of practice, right? Take non-compete and trade secret litigation, for instance, right? Unfair competition cases, okay? Say somebody's, making $125,000 a year, right? It's a good salary. It's a good living, right? In the vast majority of parts of the country, somebody making $125,000 outside of maybe a San Francisco and New York, right? But somebody who's, living in Orlando making $125,000 a year, that's a pretty good living, okay? That person is statistically definitely in the upper half of income earners in that particular part of the country. So that's definitely a middle or upper middle class income based on statistics. And that person, if they were sued for violating a non-compete agreement or theft of trade secrets, let's say the case is utterly bogus. It is a BS case filed primarily just to stifle ordinary competition, plaintiffs lying through their teeth about everything. There is no confidential information, no proprietary, no trade secrets, no protectable customer relationships. It's all smoke and mirrors, as a lot of these cases often are, in my opinion. That person, that upper middle class person making $125,000 a year could not afford to defend himself, right? That sounds crazy, right? But that's the reality, okay? If you look at what those cases cost, if you look at how long those cases drag out and the cost of discovery, right? The exchange of documents, the sort of never-ending parade of depositions and transcripts and document review and document hosting, right? The average person, or even the upper middle class person in America, that person cannot afford to defend themselves. That's what we have gotten ourselves into here. We've gotten ourselves into a system where only those few people who have access to tremendous resources have the ability to defend themselves. And barring that, the only people who have a shot at getting access to justice are people who can find a lawyer who's willing to help them on a sort of pro bono, low bono, or contingency fee basis. I've done a number of non-compete cases where I either charge the person nothing to defend them, or I charged them some very modest engagement fee and then said, look, you don't have to pay me anything else. I'll take care of it. I'll litigate it. And if we win, I'll try to recoup the money from the other side. But I don't know very many people doing that because it is probably a terrible business decision and it is incredibly risky. And the only reason I do it is because I believe in the cause, because I am so adamantly against non-compete abuse, which has become an American epidemic and a crisis, and is stifling competition and labor mobility, and it's ruining people's lives, right? It's preventing them from earning a living and feeding their families and, taking care of their responsibilities, paying their mortgage, right? I'm so opposed to it philosophically and morally and ethically that I consider it my imperative. It is my duty to do what I can to help folks who could not otherwise afford access to justice. But barring situations like that and legal aid and sort of, people out there doing pro bono work, barring those exceptions, access to justice is a real problem in America. Then there's the fact that the legal deck is stacked so strongly in favor of big corporate interests. Take student loans, for example, right? It's preposterous. Student loans can't be discharged in bankruptcy. That's absurd, right? You know what else you can't discharge in bankruptcy? Child support and criminal fines. Wow. How did student loans get put in the same category as child support and criminal fines? I'll tell you how. Lobbyists and corporate interests getting in the pockets of lawmakers and having them write the laws in their favor. That's just one example out of many, right? The deck is stacked in favor of big corporate interests. And so if you go into law and you're smart and you're logical and you're analytical and you're a true believer and you believe in truth, justice, and the American way, not too long into your career, right, within the first 5 to 10 years, you're going to hit a point where you say, wow, the emperor has no clothes, right? You're going to see rulings that make no sense. You're going to see statutes that make no sense. You're going to see, the sort of, here's the way things are, here's the rules, but, here's the exception for this big company over here, right? That really is how the system works. It is nakedly political. It's about big corporate interests. It's about who has money and who has power. And in many instances, the emperor has no clothes. And you're going to find yourself, if you don't, learn to come to grips with that, you're going to find yourself banging your head against a brick wall and saying, how is this possible? How are courts ruling this way? How did the law get to be, where it is now? How do people not see the reality of what's going on? No, you're right. That is the reality of what's going on. That is. It's political. It's a shell game, and in many instances, the emperor has no clothes. And I have a First Amendment right to say that. And anybody who has a problem with it, you can bring it to my face. But so that's the reality. Okay, law is messed up. There are plenty of lawyers in law who are greedy, unethical, corrupt. There's bias, there's cronyism. In some instances, there's outright judicial activism or corruption, right? So there's a lot of problems out there in the legal system. And, for some people, I know plenty of folks who got into law and they're young and idealistic. And after a while, they kind of realize how ugly it all is and how dirty it is. And it's not sort of what they originally envisioned. They had this sort of idealistic approach where they were going to get into law and they were going to do good work and help lots of people and make the world a better place. And yeah, you can do that, right? There are places in law, there are parts of the country, and there are areas of practice. There are things you can do in law where you really can help people, and you really can, in small part, make the system a little bit better, or make your neighborhood or your city or your state a little bit better. You can, improve things for some folks and change some lives. Absolutely, you can do that. But you have to be mindful of the fact that it's very tough. It's very tough to get into law, to fight the good fight, to make money and survive while keeping your head up, keeping your nose clean, helping people, and not selling out. Because there are invariably lots of people in law who like to think that they're doing the right thing or they're doing good work, right? But when it really comes down to it, that's a lie they tell themselves to prevent themselves from having to face the truth of who they are, who they've become, and what they stand for, because the work that they are doing tells that story, right? You are like, if you are a lawyer, right? And this is just my opinion, and again, it offends a lot of people. If you are a lawyer, you have to make a moral decision about who you are and what you stand for and what you value, and what you're going to advocate for, right? And there's a big divide in law between some people who say, well, it's just my client, and I'm just doing my job, and that's what they instructed me to do, and I have to represent them, right? Quite frankly, you don't have to represent anybody, right? You don't have to represent anybody unless court appoints you to, and then even then, if the court appoints you to it, and you have a moral, ethical, philosophical problem with providing such representation, then even then you can probably get relieved of that obligation, right? So for the most part, 99% of the time, you do not have a duty to go out there and represent or advocate for anyone if it does not align with your personal, moral, philosophical, ethical principles, right? And I have no beef whatsoever, right, with people who will go out and defend people accused of heinous crimes and people accused of all kinds of terrible wrongdoing, right? If their personal moral framework on it is, look, I understand I have a problem with that type of conduct myself, but I believe everybody has the right to counsel and to a defense, and if that's why you're doing it, then I totally understand that, and I think that's righteous, right? But I do think at the end of the day, there's a lot of lawyers out there practicing law who have sold out and try to lie to themselves about what they are and what they do, because the truth is very uncomfortable, and the truth is they're advancing interests and causes and representing people in cases where they're doing work that does not align with their core values, right? And I think that sort of thing, even though this has gotten sort of far afield for some people who might be listening and they're saying, oh my God, Pollard is crazy, right? No, like this all goes back to Sartre, and it goes back to authenticity and existentialism, right? That's where it goes back to. Like, that is real stuff, people, okay? You cannot spend 10, 15, 20 years doing law, right? And doing cases and representing clients where you have a personal, moral, philosophical problem with the work that you are doing, right? Like, there are some people who really do not care, okay? And those people go into a totally different bucket. There are some people who are straight up outright mercenaries, right? They do not care. They are guns for hire. They will represent anybody in any case. They do not care. They look at it purely as a business and as a challenge, where they say, I don't care how ugly the case is, how nefarious the client, whatever's at issue. I don't care. Pay me my money and I'll get in and I'll strategize and I'll try and win the case, right? There are people like that, and they don't have a particular moral quandary about the work that they're doing. But then there's a whole lot more people out there, I think, who do deep down inside have a moral issue with the work that they're doing. And they bury it deep down, they gloss over it, they pretend like it doesn't exist, and they say, I'm just doing my job, just representing my client, doing what I have to do, doing what I'm supposed to do, I'm just doing my job, just being a lawyer, right? And 10, 12, 13, 14, 15 years go by, and then they wake up one day and they say, God, what have I become? I hate myself, right? That's a big problem, folks. I know a ton of people in law who are deeply unhappy with who they are and what they have become. And they've done it all for the sake of law, career, being a lawyer. Oh, it's just my job. Nope. Eventually you become what you do. Eventually you become what you do every day. So there's all of those considerations, right? In terms of ethics and principles and philosophy and dysfunction in the system and access to justice and inequality, right? Those are all things that you have to consider if you are going to get into law. So that's my perspective, right, on whether or not you should go to law school. Obviously, there's the financial aspect of it, there's the time aspect of it, there's the fact that the legal world has changed. It's not the sort of steady, stable, good career for everybody that it once was. And in concert with that, the system is just riddled with all sorts of problems and issues that we just discussed. So what do I recommend, right? Who should go to law school? You should go to law school if, one, you understand all of this, right? And there's a lot of people out there, rah, law, oh, it's so great, the profession and the bar, and, they think, don't go to law school because, you think that being a lawyer is like some kind of prestigious elite thing, right? Don't go to law school because you just want to say, I'm a lawyer, right? And that makes you feel, particularly swag, right? Don't do that. That's a bad motivation, okay? Go to law school if, one, you can go to law school and either one of two things on the financial piece. Either one, you can go to an absolutely elite legal institution, right? If you can go to an elite school, okay, fine. Like if you go to Harvard Law School and you're like, yeah, I'm smart and I think law is interesting. I could do that. I don't have any. I don't have a problem with it. I'll figure it out. A law degree from Harvard. Yeah, obviously, if you can go to law school at Harvard or Columbia or Yale or whatever, any elite law school, right? That's not a bad idea because, like, say, for instance, Harvard, right? A degree from Harvard Law is always going to be valuable. Let's just be real, people, about the market. Or if you can go to a good school or a state flagship school, right? A good state flagship school for relatively inexpensive, right? If you can go to a state flagship school for in-state tuition, in-state tuition is particularly affordable. Again, probably a good investment, right? So if you can go to an elite school or go to a good school for a relatively reasonable dollar amount without sort of burying yourself in $100,000 of debt, yeah, it's probably not a bad investment, okay? You can go to law school if, in spite of understanding all of these problems and all of these obstacles and all of these issues, right? If you say, yeah, well, I want to go to law school so I can work on this particular issue, right? If you say, you want to be an advocate for immigrants, right? And people seeking asylum, right? If you, knowing all of the bullshit and the drama and how ugly it is out there, if there's an issue that you care about that is deeply meaningful to you on a personal, philosophical, moral, ethical level, and that's something you want to go work on, then go to law school, right? If you say, you're opposed to the death penalty and you want to go do capital punishment cases and try to defend people and get people off death row, go to law school. If you say you want to go be a prosecutor and that's very important to you personally, morally, philosophical, and that's what you've always wanted to do, okay, go to law school, right? Those are good reasons to go in that direction, right? If you're going to say, "Oh, I want to do constitutional law," shut up. Just shut up, right? Because I mean, you probably know most people who say these, or I want to do international law, or I've always been fascinated by corporate law, right? Just shut the front door, okay? Don't make me throw up on you, right? Don't go to law school, okay? If you're very smart, right? If you're very smart and you're hardworking and you're tough and you're business savvy, then yeah, law school, at least from a sort of business standpoint, right? From a market, finance, career standpoint, right? I'm not talking about the fulfillment you'll get, but I'm talking about as a sort of economic opportunity, as a business opportunity. If you are very smart, tough, hardworking, and business savvy, then yes, law school could be a very good business or financial decision for you, because law is ripe for disruption. Okay, as addressed earlier in the conversation, the old world is changing, right? Sort of the very stable, established model of law and the big firms and their hourly billing, and law being a black box. All of these things are changing, right? It's becoming way more accessible to the public. It's technology and the internet, and so there's all kinds of cool stuff going on that front, and hopefully it will continue to move in that direction. But if you're smart, hardworking, business savvy, and you can go to either a highly rated law school or a good law school, reputable law school, without going deeply into debt, then yeah, it's probably a good economic opportunity. But as I said earlier, you always got to remember there are moral consequences of what you do, right? And that has nothing to do with your particular religion, faith, or any kind of creed, right? That's just a matter of you become what you do, you are what you do, right? And if you get into law and you do a bunch of dirty work for many years, and you sell out for the dollar, and you do things you don't agree with and that make you uncomfortable, and you can't be proud of, that's going to take a toll on you over the long term. You have to be mindful of the fact that there's more to life than just money. There's more to life than just business. You got to think about humanity and your integrity and your conscience, and being able to be proud of who you are and what you do and the work that you do, and feel good about what you have contributed your advocacy to. Because particularly if you're smart and hardworking and tough and a good lawyer, right, you can make a difference out there, and you can make that difference for good or for evil. And that's a personal choice that you have to make, and you have to be comfortable living with the consequences. So for anybody who's thinking about law school, there is my almost hour-long discussion that lays out my perspective and my considerations. And I've done this because I have gotten hundreds, if not thousands, of messages over the past several years from people who wanted my advice about whether or not they should go to law school. And rather than typing a million emails and ignoring the ones I just don't have time to get back to, I figured I would just record it as an episode. Here you go, folks. Share it with anybody you want who's considering law school. That's my take. JP, have a good day.